My name is Ted Durante. I'm born and raised in Cheyenne. Graduated East High School in 1968. Decided to go into University of Wyoming the next year. Actually was in Army ROTC as a freshman, but soon realized that I wasn't going to have near enough money to finish school, and I had a draft lottery number of 23, which means if I wasn't in school, I was definitely going to get drafted. So I decided to go to see some different recruiters because I wanted to go on active duty and get the full GI Bill. And I stopped off at the Navy recruiter's office, and he said, "Well, what are your interests?" And I said, "Well, I've worked a lot of construction being in between my years in high school." And he said, "Well, do you want to be a Navy Seabee?" I said, "What's a Seabee?" He said, "Well, it's a construction battalion part of the Navy. That's what they do. They build things." So long story short, I enlisted in the Naval Reserve in February of 1969. Went to some schooling, and early in 1970 I went on active duty. Subsequently got orders to Vietnam. Went to Vietnam about the 4th or 5th of January of 1971. And I have to tell you a story. When I landed, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And at those days, they told us to wear our dress blue uniform to fly from the United States. Take a day and a half to get there. It was a wool uniform. We landed in Vietnam 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. And when I got off the plane, I thought that they had actually put up some fans to blow hot air on us to get us either used to the heat or whatever. And as it turned out, there was no fans. It was just a little hot breeze. And as I recall, it was well over 110 degrees, and that was at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I was shocked. I thought, my God, I've died and gone to hell. As it turned out, I hadn't died, but it was sure hot as hell. So after we got checked in, I was sent up to Da Nang with a smaller group of Seabees. They were called NAVCATs, Navy Action Teams is what they were called. I was there for 3 or 4 days, and the commanding officer came in and he said, "Well," he said, "we need some help down at another location." He said, "We're going to send you down there. You're a 3rd class petty officer, which is an E4. They said there's only 2 other Seabees down there, and there's some naval advisors. You're going to live on a South Vietnamese Navy base." And so I said, "Okay, well, let's get going." So we got some vehicles and took some material down to a little town called Quang Nai. And it was me, 3 other Seabees, and 4 naval advisors, and we lived right on a South Vietnamese naval base. And our mission as Seabees was to build dependent housing for the South Vietnamese Navy personnel on that base. And on that particular base, they lived with their families. And so I ate, drank, slept, laughed, and cried with those South Vietnamese people over the course of 6 months. So I had a great appreciation for them as a people, when most veterans that went to Vietnam didn't have the opportunity to get close with the people. So that's one of the things that kind of helped me in that process. My next 6 months, I was actually on an island off the coast of Chulai. A lot easier job, less stress, less worries about the typical things of war. I mean, there was a very small number of people on the island along with the Seabees. So I spent 6 months doing that. So when my 1 year was up, I was coming back from Vietnam, and I was on an individual plane with nothing but returning GIs, and we landed in Oakland. And that was on January the 1st of 1972. It was amazing because the pilot of the plane flew around for 10 or 15 minutes before he landed, and we couldn't quite understand what he was doing, but in reality he wanted to be in the air when New Year's Eve dropped, because even back in 1972 we had fireworks, and so the whole bay there in Oakland lit up with fireworks, and so that was kind of neat. That certainly wasn't done for us, but we all kind of felt like that's pretty neat, and so that's something I always remember.
That's really amazing.
So we landed. The airport was virtually empty. There was no one there except a couple of bus drivers, and they put everybody on buses, and we went over to Treasure Island, and that's where we were going to be eventually separated, or to go on to a different duty station. But I personally was thankful that there was no protesters. I would have preferred not to have to put up with that. You spend a year in Vietnam, you're 22 years old, you're you're still bulletproof, you didn't kill any babies, you saved babies, and to have to put up with that kind of stuff from people in your own country wouldn't have been anything that I would have been willing to do. So thank God that didn't happen, because I would have probably been the one put in jail rather than the protesters. So that's a good thing. When I joined the Navy initially, I was in the reserves, and that was a 2-year active duty commitment, which I had fulfilled after Vietnam. So I went back and reaffiliated with the reserves and continued to drill. And it was a very rewarding experience to be in the reserves at the time. And I continued to do it until I had put in 30 years, 6 months, and 18 days wearing the uniform. And by then I was kicked out, because there's a thing called high-year tenure, and you can only stay so long, and then you have to get off active duty. And as they explained it to me, you've got to make room at the top for all these other younger kids coming up from the bottom. So that's my 30-year career. I am the type of guy where my glass is always half full, always has been. And I can truly say that my experiences in Vietnam, if you look at all the bad and the good, I have found out a way to make those experiences more positive than negative. Simple things like electric lights, running water, the things that everybody takes for granted. When you get over there and you live in a third world country, and the only way you get water is to bail it hand over hand out of a well, and then you have to pay somebody for that water, that gives you an appreciation of turning on a faucet over here where the water just comes out. And if you want electric lights, you have to have a generator, and it better run, and it better be maintained, and you better have fuel for it, or when nighttime comes, you won't have any lights. So those are just two examples of the things that the average everyday American takes for granted. But if you live without that for a while, then you appreciate what I call the finer things in life. So no question that I turned out to be a better person because of my time in Vietnam. Having said that, I understand why a lot of Vietnam vets struggle with their experience, because theirs was not the same as mine. CBs build things, and we protect what we build, but we don't go out at night looking for the bad guys. And unfortunately, a lot of Vietnam vets, that's what their job was. And mine was to build things for the South Vietnamese people, and I got to know them. And like I said, my experiences were more positive than negative. And because of that, I was able to continue to stay in the military and eventually retire as a naval reservist. And that allowed me to retire from my civilian job a lot sooner too. So you work hard, you play hard, and in the end you hope to have enough money that you can, buy a beer every now and then and take the wife out to dinner. So I'm still involved with people that wear the uniform. I'm currently the vice chair for a Department of Defense agency called Employer Supported Guard and Reserve. We are a primarily volunteer-run organization. Every state in the union has an ESGR committee. We have about 20 volunteers statewide. We have 3 full-time contractors who run our office out of the Cheyenne Armory. And our mission is to inform service members and their employers of their joint responsibilities to each other under a federal law called USERA, Uniformed Services Employments and Reemployments Rights Act. And that federal legislation says that a service member in the Guard or Reserves cannot be discriminated against at their place of employment just because they're in the military. And so that is what our group does, is to educate both parties, and we mediate issues if there are any between the parties. And if they cannot be mediated, then the individual service member has the right to contact the Department of Labor and file a claim with them, and then lawyers get involved, and usually the employer will get a fast education about the USERA law, and eventually the discrimination will cease to exist. The other thing we do as a committee, we recognize employers that do go above and beyond and support their military members, and we recognize them with different types of awards. And we also, once or twice a year, are able to get a C-130 from the Air National Guard in Cheyenne, and we hold what we call a boss lift, and we invite employers to come and go with us for a 1, a 2, or a 3-day trip to different military sites around the state, usually. And just coincidentally, on Monday, after this thing concludes on the 7th, on Sunday, we have a boss lift scheduled out of Cheyenne up to Camp Guernsey. And so it seems like I'm always busy, but I consider myself lucky to still be able to hang out with the men and the women that are still lucky enough to wear the uniform. And it's truly an honor to be in the military. I've always felt that way, very patriotic. And as long as I can continue to give back some of the good fortune that I had being in the military, then that's what I'm going to continue to do until I can no longer do it. And who knows how long that'll be. I still am able to look in the mirror and I know for sure who I am. I remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, and so we're going to continue to push forward until I'm no longer able to do that. So I appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences.
I think it's amazing. I guess one thing I'd like to ask is, throughout the interviews, we haven't had anyone that actually spent adequate amount of time, like you said,
right,
living with the populace. Could you, would you like to go into a little more detail? Because I understand where you're coming from with that, and I think that that's a very key, especially like you said, in your outlook on why you can continue to do the things you do.
Absolutely.
And if you could you like maybe shed a little light of maybe what that experience might have been like, living with these people instead of, how you said the offensive, what the other guys were.
That's why I was really blessed in what I did at least the first 6 months. My unit, I mean, there was 3 Seabees. I've often thought, my God, if anything ever happened, they'd never even find me. There was very few people even knew where I was, you know. But at the time, I didn't realize that because I was just doing what I was told to do. But it was very unique. Like I said, we lived on this South Vietnamese Navy base, and it probably had 50 Navy sailors, South Vietnamese Navy sailors, and they all had families, and they all lived right there on the base in literally shacks, dirt floors. And our mission was to build new apartment type housing for them. And during that 6-month period, they actually worked for us, helping us to lay block. And so we worked together 8 hours a day, and they picked up a little bit of English, and I picked up a little bit of South Vietnamese, and everybody knew how to ask for a cold beer, and everybody knew what it was to work hard, and everybody knew what it was to be tired. And on many occasions, I would go over to their house or their area of the base where they lived, and we would eat together. And they were clearly poor people, but they didn't hesitate to, you know, give me the invite to come over and drink fairly warm beer, because ice was a real rare commodity in Vietnam. Hardly anybody had the ability to have ice, so I kind of learned to drink warm beer and a very strong whiskey that they would come up with. And I just got to know them personally. Those people are just like any other people, you know. They have families, they have kids, they have dogs. And so that was the great part about that 6-month period, was that I felt what I was doing really did make a difference. And everybody was very, very appreciative. And so I didn't get a bad taste in my mouth for what I was doing. I felt like I was accomplishing something. And so that's why I was luckier than the average individual serving in Vietnam, who came back with nothing but hate and distrust. And I really feel blessed that I was able to go through that positive experience, which, like I said, you know, eventually made me a lot better person. And because of that, that's another reason I probably stayed in the reserves, because it was a great experience for me. A year in Vietnam turned out to be a great experience. And most people can't say that. So it ended up being a great experience that lasted clear into the latter part of a lifetime. Just like today, I feel blessed that I was able to do all the things I did. That's why I still volunteer with different veterans organizations, because everything about it's been positive. Very little negative, all positive. So I want to keep pushing that forward. I've got a son that's in the Air National Guard. A couple of years ago, he wasn't sure he wanted to stay in. It was causing conflicts with his job, conflicts with his wife. He just had a new baby. Well, we sat down and we talked about it. He's still in, and I hope he puts in 20, and I hope he puts in 30. So, but I'm not the norm. I understand that. I'm not the norm, and I've spoken to many, many vets here this weekend, and they do have demons. But hopefully this will help all of them.
Yeah.